So we're not in a culture that is putting value on self-respect. Do you see? And so, again, it's like I would not advise, but a psychiatrist sees all the time, case after case, where a female child might be sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. Well, he helps pay the bills, and so she doesn't get rid of him. Now, these are sad cases that we all need to learn from. But I would say the bottom line is if we are in a system that seeks to destroy our self-respect, and our self-respect gets destroyed to the level that being beat up is okay, or children being abused is okay because there's money in the situation, that's a tragedy. That's an overall tragedy of what has happened to us. But again, not to mention that it is not happening in the white world. There's a white, as people are talking about what the black male football players are doing, at the same time, there's a white father who killed 5 children. Nobody has seen his face in the news. Killed 5 children. There's a white grandfather in the news today who killed grandchildren, maybe 6 people in the family. But that's not being paraded over and over and over and over. Again, there's a missing white female, I think, on the campus in Virginia. And so a white male was following her, and then he said, well, then a black male started following her. So the last person that people are thinking about probably harmed this white female it's a black man. So again, we have to be aware of the whole picture. And if we talk about the picture, as opposed to being afraid, and tragically, we have a lot of so-called leadership that is afraid to address racism, white supremacy. The president won't address specific racism, white supremacy. Racism, white supremacy, the historic problem that has impacted in the violence and the terrorism of racism, white supremacy that black people have to deal with 24/7. I deal with people who come in limping into this office, being abused every time they go into the workplace. Not physical abuse, but psychological abuse that becomes physical abuse. And it's terrorism because the people end up being, they got to go to work, but they're afraid to go to work. What am I going to encounter when I get in the workplace this way? What is a supervisor going to think of to demean me and humiliate me? And this goes on week after week and week after week and month after month and month after month.
Hang on a second, Doc. 800-450-7876. Brenda, you still with us on line 2?
Yes, I am. Dr.
You have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, Carl. I wanted to maybe shed some light. I wanted to share because I feel like no one has all the answers, no one person. But have you considered, I know from a family member who is now living, she was 30 years in the Library of Congress, she worked. She shared with me about a situation that happened way back. This is going back to the roots. How did her mother, which is my great-grandmother, had, 7 male and then 6 females or something like that. And she said she remembered her mother always taking care, making sure the males were taken care of, but the females were reared. And sometimes you may hear it in the form that the women raise the daughters, but they spoil the sons, or something similar like that. And so, to me, that can connect the dots to why many females, whatever reason or what they feel contributes. Like if they see a woman being abused and they take the attitude, toward the man, you have to go back and connect those dots. If culturally you have been, certain people have been, women have been shown that it's the male, okay?
Right.
And then,
I tell you what, Brenda, we're coming up on a break. I get the gist of what you're saying, and I'll let Dr. Welsing respond on the other side. Thank you for your call.
Yes.
800-450-7876 is the number to call. Speak to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Take the calls in less than 4 minutes right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Thank you for staying with us and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and from her best-selling book, The ISIS Paper. Dr. Welsing, Brenda is saying that some of this behavior, and I guess she's referring to the fact that we've been discussing this for most of this week, and a lot of the women sided with Ray Rice, and she was saying maybe because of a learned behavior.
I'm telling you, Carl, it's like if we had an X-ray machine that could see the thinking, what goes on in the conscious and subconscious thinking of the women who, it's like, in other words, if women value themselves, they do not go along with the idea of being beat up and injured. If men value themselves, they do not go along with the idea of being beaten and mistreated and abused physically, psychologically, socially. So I do, if one could just check, well, if someone is at any level saying what Mr. Rice did to his fiancée, now wife, do you see, is the person thinking, she's got to be crazy to give up all of that money or to walk away from all of that money? Do you see? But if money becomes more important than the human being itself, but again, the system of racism, white supremacy does not value human beings. It's a machine that has to kill human beings for white genetic survival. So all of that comes down through the programming where people end up not having a high level of value for themselves, males and females. And this is a tragedy, and this is something that as we work on, I talk about racism, white supremacy, so we can replace it with a system of justice. But foundational for justice is self-respect. And I say self-respect is more valuable or more powerful than a nuclear weapon. And this is what has been damaged as far as we're concerned as black people under this 500-year system of abuse that is inclusive of the period of formal slavery. But we are just in a variation on that in the present. It hasn't, slavery was a phase of racism, white supremacy. And the phase that we are in now is just continuous. It's doing something by, modified means to achieve the same goal objective.
Well,
So,
I'm
go ahead.
glad you mentioned slavery because I want to talk about spanking and child abuse. Adrian Peterson, and people are saying, and black people are saying that's something that's indoctrinated in our culture, that we do spank our children, and some people say we're all this comes from slavery, that somehow it's in our genes to be violent. Can you address that for us?
No, I say that when violence is done to a people systematically, and they are not able to act against the perpetrators of that violence, then the violence is turned inward. Do you see? In other words, it's violence preventing black people from talking about racism. If you talk about racism, you lose your job. If you talk about racism, you won't be on TV. Now that's violence. In other words, the thing that is causing you harm, forbidding you to talk about it. And so then you end up dealing in an unjust way, internally. So I don't say, in other words, I would say the system of racism, white supremacy, if it could get black people to talk about slavery. Now, slavery was a long time ago. And so, yes, bad things were happening during slavery. But now we are post-racial. Now, that's a lie. But if it can get people focusing on slavery, so then people start saying, well, we were beaten in slavery, and so that is our culture, and so that's why we do it now, as opposed to slavery was a phase of the system of racism and white supremacy. Racism and white supremacy 500 years ago was 24/7 abuse. Racism and white supremacy in 2014 is 24/7 abuse. And that abuse is carried down through, it's happening externally to black people, and then black people impose it on themselves.
So is there any truth to
that?
that?
The system says we will pay your entertainers multiple millions of dollars to train you to call yourselves niggers and dogs and bitches and hoes. And so then you start calling yourself bitches and hoes. And then you start relating to each other like you're niggers and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs. Whereas the system understands if we annihilate their self-respect, then they will help us destroy themselves. And so we have to become knowledgeable about what the system is about. Not spend time hating white people is just like playing chess or playing football or basketball. You don't spend time hating your opponent. You spend time understanding your opponent, understanding the game, understanding the specific strategies and tactics that are used. For example, it has been brought to my attention, and I noticed it, that if we say, okay, who is the biggest terrorist in the world? Right now, it's ISIS. And people are saying, Dr. Welsing, that's the name of your book. The ISIS Papers. The major book that is out there on talking about racism and white supremacy. Somehow, magically, that ends up being the given name to the terrorist that the president and the secretary of state, we're going to pursue these terrorists to the gates of hell. The next thing black people will look up, if they got a copy of the ISIS papers in their backpack, then they're going to be suspect. Are you following me?
Yes, I am. I'm just visualizing that if somebody, say at the airport, has a copy of your book, they'll most likely get pulled over.
The flag of this so-called group ISIS is taken from the cover of the Cress Theory of Color Confrontation. That black flag with the white circle in the middle, that's the design on the copy of the Cress Theory. Just cut out the square in that circle. That means the non-white global majority surrounding white, a white minority.
Wow, somebody must have read your book.
Well, you see, again, we are in a system of racism and white supremacy. The people who practice holding the system together, they don't spend any time not understanding what is going on. They understand exactly and specifically. And it's no different. It's just a variation on the theme of preventing black people from talking about racism. Get them talking about anything else. They can talk about police brutality. They can talk about poor education. They can talk about homelessness. They can talk about no low-income housing. All of these are symptoms. But don't let them talk about the disease because they will have too much understanding. Each person can think individually on their own. They won't have to be in such a state of confusion. They can say, now I understand, and so therefore this is what I'm going to do with my behavior.
Well, Dr. Welsing, let me ask you this. Do you think some people who are in the position to engage in this conversation deliberately don't bring it up because they want to preserve their jobs, for one, and their livelihood, for two?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm the only psychiatrist, only black psychiatrist in the United States that has talked about racism for 40 years. The only psychiatrist, black or white, who has talked about racism for 40 years. Only psychiatrist in the world. This is a taboo subject. I had applied for a job one time at a black community mental health center that was being run by white people. And so I said, okay, I want to, I'd like to work in the clinic as a child psychiatrist. And you know what the white director said to me? You have an excellent reputation as a psychiatrist. However, our staff is white. You talk about racism, and so, no, you can't have the job. And I laughed. I said, here you are in a black community, in a black mental health center. You tell a black psychiatrist they have an excellent reputation as a psychiatrist. But because the staff is white, and you talk about racism and make the white people uncomfortable. So you can't have the job, and the black people can't have any mental health.
Right. Hold that thought right there, Doc. We got to take a quick break. 800-450-7876 to speak to Dr. Welsing. Taking calls, folks, in less than 4 minutes or so right here on 14. And thank you for staying with us, folks, and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, would you like to take the call, or would you want to finish up your story on the clinic?
Oh, that's good.
Okay, let's go to Michael on line 1 in Columbus, Ohio. Michael, do you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, thanks for taking my calls. She is absolutely right. He who controls the printed page and the images controls the thinking of the world. We must stop buying into this lie and constantly putting us out there and make our own images. Show them images. When they want to show a young man's child being whooped, let's show the backs of blacks and men and women that they whooped. We have to show them what they have done to us, because they're in so denial that they don't want to see the atrocity they put on us. And I'm asking her, do we need repair centers so we can repair ourselves from this inappropriate behavior? Because we still got the house Negro versus the field Negro. And until we come together and learn that he don't care about neither one of us, and the only thing he has over us is money. Our biggest downfall is we want his money. That's his God. Can we come up with something? Repair centers, talk about the problems and how we need to heal ourselves. The other thing is, we need a movie. I like Hidden Colors, but Hidden Colors need to come out with a movie of the 21st century racism and the cause and effect. We need to have that in the theaters, because we can't seem to get ourselves together, but we'll go see images on a movie screen. So I hope they come up with a movie.
All right, Michael.
Thank you.
Dr. Welsing, do we need repair centers?
I think that the gentleman's statement about we need repair centers, I agree. Do you see, but if we begin to understand the whole dynamic process of racism, white supremacy, and understand the psychological damage that has been done, and in the work of Neely Fuller, where he had a list of 10 behaviors, 10 or 11 behaviors, very simple behaviors, and he calls them counter-racism, and I call them behavior code for black self and group respect and black mental health. See, I got into a discussion, trying to understand racism as a psychiatrist, because I wanted to understand what was making us as black people mentally ill. But here are some of the behaviors. And so the gentleman, he could decide, well, I'm going to practice some of these behaviors, and it might rub off on the people that I relate to. Stop name-calling one another. Stop gossiping about one another. Stop squabbling with one another. Stop snitching on one another, informing on one another for reasons of personal gain. Stop cursing one another. Stop being discourteous to one another. Stop being disrespectful to one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop fighting one another, and stop killing one another. And I've added to that list. Stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. Stop making dirt and filth the norm. Stop using and selling drugs to one another. Stop black children from thinking that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. Black people need to be in their 30s before they have any children. Stop believing that welfare will save you. Start believing in prosperity. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. Stop being divided and conquered. Stop allowing black, brown, red, and yellow peoples being divided by white supremacy. So we do need repair centers, but you don't have to wait for a building to be built. You see, it's like if you are in a group of people and you decide that you're not going to gossip or name call it, it's changing the dynamic that are in that group. Or when you encounter another black person, you just say, I will not be discourteous or disrespectful to another black person. That changes the dynamic. You see, and if we transform ourselves from being victimized by racism, white supremacy, being so that we are no longer valuing ourselves and no longer respecting ourselves, do you see? It's like not believing that we should be beaten or hit by anybody. I remember Neely Fuller saying that black people should have relationships. If a hand goes up to hit, the relationship is over. If a hand on the male or a hand on the female goes up to hit, the relationship is permanently over. The people don't have to engage in I hate you or anything like that. The relationship is over. And so that just becomes code. This is the way that black people relate to one another because they are on a mission to transform racism, white supremacy into a system of justice so there can be peace. And they see themselves as powerful enough to transform the system. Black people transformed the system in the civil rights era. And that's why the system decided, wait a minute, we have got to get these people to demean and degrade themselves and one another. So we transform them from saying black is beautiful, black pride, black self-respect, black power. We've got to change them. We've got to get them to call themselves dogs and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs. Because then we will have them destroy themselves. And this is where we are, black people. I wrote this, a tragedy unfolds when men call themselves dogs, when their women call themselves bitches. These two will join together and call their offspring little bow wows. Subconsciously, and once we begin to see clearly that, see, the system of racism, white supremacy, I wish that white people had psychiatrists that could talk to them about their white supremacy behavior and their fear of being a minority on the planet and their fear of genetic annihilation so they can get some insight in their behavior and stop. But basically, they're not going to stop doing what they do. You see, we'll have Nazi Germany over here in a heartbeat. So I wish they would stop, but chances are they're not going to stop. But we can stop them. You see, in other words, white people will say to me, if we're a minority, Dr. Welsing, we're fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet. How come we're able to control the planet when 9/10 of the people are black, brown, red, and yellow? I said, because you have been successful in programming. First of all, you conquer by the gun, and then you control, and then you teach the global majority to hate themselves and want to be white. See, it's like if I went on eBay tomorrow and I had 3 pills, and one would turn you white, the next one would give you long, straight hair, and the next one would give you white features, I'd be the wealthiest person on the planet in a few days, because all of the non-white people have been taught to hate themselves and want to be white, want to have blonde hair, want to have long hair that you can shake and look white. This is the programming of racism, white supremacy, or to give people the image of God as a white man. Call him Jesus, but if he was in that part of the world, in the North Africa, the Middle East, he was black. But no, turn him to white. And so the very people that you trample on and that you demean and degrade and oppress, they will love you because you will be the image of the God image that you've given them.
All right.
And so they will never emancipate themselves from that image.
Right. We got to take a quick break. Hang on, Doc. We're at the top of the hour. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing is our guest. Number to call to speak to her, 800-450-7876. We're going to take a listening with us, folks, and our guest is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. You know her from the ISIS papers. She's a psychiatrist, one of the best in the business. The number to call to speak to her, 800-450-7876. If you have a question, we got folks from Baltimore, D.C., L.A., Chicago. Got questions for you, Doc. Do you want to finish up what you're saying, or do you want to take some questions?
No, Carl, let me just share this with the audience, that just think about this, that under white supremacy, when they would lynch black men, they would castrate him, meaning attack the testicles. And this is for the football player who was spanking his child, and then he ends up damaging the testicles of a little black male child. Just to, I mean, he didn't think, okay, I'm doing this because this is what white supremacy would do to black men. No, but this is comes about out of the dynamics that are within the system itself. He didn't mean to, but he did. He didn't mean to, he didn't think about it consciously, but he did. See, it's just like the system consciously thinks. The black man can cause me genetic annihilation, so I must turn him into a woman. I must effeminize him. You see, so he starts wearing earrings and having Shirley Temple curls and all of that. And if he's going to be in the movie, I'm going to insist that he wear a dress. Because if I can turn him into a woman, then I don't have to worry about him causing me genetically annihilation. And I can move him along that track by making certain that he won't have a father in the home. I can do that by simply having high levels of male unemployment. I can control whether there will be men in a household. I just wanted to share that.
All right. Doc is laying it down. 800-450-7876. James in Baltimore. James, you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
I just wanted to say there's nothing changed about this racist system. They've been out to destroy the black man by all means possible. I mean, they give us what? They give us the drugs. They're shooting stuff in the air in our communities to make us sick. They're poisoning our foods in our communities. They're doing everything to destroy us. So nothing's changed. This system is always going to remain the same.
No, we can change it. See, we can change it just by the understanding that you have. And you say, okay, this is what is happening. Then the next step, well, wait a minute, what can I do about it? I can be conscious about my food intake. I can certainly be conscious about, if they're trying to make me disrespect myself and call myself a gangster and a thug and call the woman I relate to a bitch and a hoe, now I can change that. But if I understand, it's no different than if somebody says, I can be a successful football player, I can be a successful basketball player, I can be a successful tennis player. Teach me what the game is about. Help me understand strategy and tactics, and I can counter it.
The concept of thinking must change.
But you're doing it by thinking about it, and do believe I can combat this. I don't have to think about myself as a gangster or a thug, or think about a black woman as a bitch or a hoe. I don't have to do that.
Absolutely.
And if I understand my goal objective is to transform a system of violence and terrorism into a system of justice, and the foundation of justice is self-respect, I can be determined to change.
All right, James, thanks for your call. 800-450-7876. Line 2 is KO. KO's in the district. KO, you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Man, I told you this was the world's greatest talk show with the world's greatest talk show host. Now people starting to see it. I knew it from day one anyway. But that's not to make your head too had no fit, Carl. But I just give thanks to the Most High for you and for Dr. Welsing for all these many years she's been on the battlefield. I just want to say that the main thing I want to say is that we actually going to win, and we just don't know it. We just don't know that we can do it. But thanks to the doctor and others, if we would do the next step, which is we've been given all the tools. If you think about every host, every guest you've had, we've had the biggest rocket scientists on earth explaining our situation, how to deal with it, what to do about it. Now we got to get the courage that we're supposed to have if we say we believers, and now go out and tell each other and repeat it to each other. Now, instead of talking about the Redskins football and Beyonce, anything else, we got to start repeating to each other the truths that we believe that we heard on this show, on this radio, all these many years now. I mean, it's been some years.
KO, do us a favor. Can you put in a question for him so she can respond?
No, I just want to say thanks.
All right. Well, we'll take that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your comments. See, black people, just think about this. The creator of the universe, whatever that force is or whatever you want to call it, made black people the parent people of the planet. We are the parents of everybody on the planet, including white people. They're a mutation from us, a genetic mutation, lost the ability to produce the skin pigment melanin. But we're the parent people on the planet, the first people on the planet, the first people on the planet. And so if we think about that and think about even what the system can't help but speak about black power, the most powerful thing they talk about being in the universe is black holes, black. The most powerful substance, dark matter. Dark matter. And if we can step to it and start saying most black, most beautiful, all the colors are fine, but most black, most beautiful, we will begin to liberate ourselves and be determined to turn this planet into something other than what it is, a scene of violence, terrorism, and the destruction of people. And when we think about the destruction of people, we have to include in our thinking the destruction of the people on the African continent with this biological warfare called Ebola, where they're projecting that it's going to be 48,000 dead people in West Africa. And we all have to say this is unacceptable. Ebola has long been identified as a biological warfare weapon, and just like HIV/AIDS. And out of our self-respect, we need to speak to it and say we don't accept that this is some disease that just fell out of the sky. And believe me, whenever a biological weapon is made, they've already made the antidote to it.
And nobody's questioning why it's now not in use.
Well, do you see what I'm saying? If we follow the news, somehow magically, the white people who have been affected have been treated.
Right, they've recovered.
Treated and cured.
Wait, how do we get our folks concerned about that? Because it seems, when we talk about Ebola, I think, wow, yeah, it was created, but they don't seem to care about it. Maybe because it's
Carl,
mostly in West Africa.
Our self-respect has been damaged. Our self-respect and how we value ourselves. I mean, we're talking about it. We talk about, okay, men and women fighting each other. Do you see being abusive to children, or that this is okay, or I'm a bitch, I'm a hoe, I'm a gangster, I'm a thug. See, that's the core of your brain. The core of how your brain reacts is off of the image of, what's the image you have of yourself? And so that's known, that's understood. So if you can damage that, and you damage it, if you can make people, what you want to sing, you want to call yourself a bitch. You want to call yourself a dog. You want to call yourself a hoe. You want to call yourself a nigger.
All right, hang on a sec, Doc. We got to take another quick break. I'll let you finish up on the other side, and Lisa wants to speak to you as well. 800-450-7876. You too can join our conversation with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. We'll take your calls in about 4 minutes or so. And thank you for staying with us and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying before the break, before we take another call for you.
I think I was saying, talking about self-respect. If I can damage your self-respect, then I can do anything to you that I want, because you're not valuing yourself, and so it won't matter what I do. So then I could put some virus in Africa, and you'll be busy calling yourself an African American, but you won't care. So we have to understand racism, white supremacy, what it is, exactly what it is. It is a system, a behavioral dynamic established to ensure white genetic survival. After they found out they were a minority, genetic recessive on the planet, well, how do I survive? And so I have to control everybody. Well, if I can destroy their concept of themselves, or I can make them worship me by giving them an image of God as my image, then I can control them. And then have them learn how to demean and degrade themselves. And so then I'm an actual minority, but I'm a functional majority. And so this is not about spending any time hating white people. Again, it's just like you don't play a game of tennis or football or basketball by hating your opponent. No, you have to understand what the game is. And I would also just say our self-respect awareness, black self-respect. Black self-respect purchasing means, okay, you've put off a decision-making about Ferguson, Missouri until January, then we're not buying any Halloween costumes, no turkey and dressing, no Christmas trees and Christmas ornaments. We will delay spending out of our self-respect. Justice delayed is justice denied. But we will have a response. We will have a response out of our awareness as to what is actually happening. We will have a response out of our awareness, out of our self-respect. And we're not going to go around hating anybody and looting and burning. No, we're not doing that.
(800-450-7876), line 5. Lisa's in D.C. Lisa, do you have a question for Dr. Welsing? We lost Lisa?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Hi. Dr. Welsing, I'm listening to you, and I keep thinking about all the things that we as black people need to do, and I listen to Carl practically every day when I'm coming home from work. So I hear you all the time. In terms of education, I just want to change just a little bit. We, as black people, don't tend to have the best education system available for our children.
how do you think we should handle something like that? I know you're talking about all these different things about and how we need to value ourselves, and many of us work very hard to put our children in good high schools so they can go to good colleges and stuff when they graduate. What do you suggest for parents who need to make sure that our kids go to some of the best schools in the city? And I'm here in D.C.
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry, was that a question? I didn't hear the end of your question.
I wanted to know, what do you think we should do as parents in terms of trying to make sure that our children get a good education, especially for high schools, so that they are able to graduate and go to one of the best universities in the country?
Well, see, I would say that the best education for black children would be the parents talking to them about the system of racism, white supremacy, and teaching them about their own history as a people, teaching them to have pride and respect for their history as African people, as black people. I mean, the thing that I appreciate most about my own education experience, I grew up in Chicago. My mother was a Chicago public school teacher. My father was a physician. But I respect the fact that they talked about what was of value to them, and the welfare and the well-being of black people was the highest level of value to them. My grandmother used to say about her husband, my father's mother, who his father was a physician also, and she would say your grandfather was a race man, meaning race first. And my parents' concept of educating us, you are going to get an education so that you can help your people. So wherever you go to school, you're not going to escape being black. You are going to enhance what happens to black people. Do you see now, in a system of racism, white supremacy, it's just like when we were in formal slavery or immediately post-slavery. They did not have the best educational centers for black people, and they still do not. Do you see, if we were fully understanding that, it's just like black people understood during formal slavery and post-slavery. If they were not going to teach us, and the black people were going to teach themselves, that they had to learn how to read and write on the dirt floor. They were determined because they understood what was against them. Now what's against us is highly refined, so you don't immediately see it. They just talk about scores are low, scores are low. Do you see? If they wanted to really teach black children and recognizing the conditions that we are forced to live under racism, white supremacy, then they would say, well, wait a minute. Many of the children come from homes that are impoverished. And so what we're going to do is put them in classrooms with few children so they can get concentrated attention that they may not get at home. But we know that they can succeed, that they can succeed second to none, as opposed to putting them in huge classes.
Right.
You see, all of the children are trying to get some of the emotional attention they may not have gotten at home, etc. So the system is structured for the inferiorization of blacks, not the making them functional superiors. And so if that's understood, and, again, I think that the self-respect, valuing themselves, is the most important lesson in telling them. Do you see, we're sending you to this school, but I know of situations in my practice where black parents have put black children in schools, integrated schools from the time they're 2 years of age, 3 years of age. And those children come out with a damaged sense of self-respect because little white children are being taught racism, white supremacy at home. And so they and their teachers are not relating in a positive, constructive way to the black children who are in their midst. The black parents think, oh, we're giving our children a superior education, but what is happening to their valuation of themselves? So it's a problem. It's a very serious problem, and children do need to be well educated. Do you see? But if they're being put in a predominantly white setting, or if they're in a predominantly black setting, one of the most important things that can be taught in the home is value yourself as a black person, and you are second to none. And that's where talking about abuse is important, because if children are called out of their names and they are abused at home, then they will not value themselves as they should be valued. So, but the problem of education is a very, very difficult one. But again, if they are taught, value yourself as a black person, second to none, and this is what you are going to encounter. See, a lot of parents will say, Dr. Welsing, do I have to teach my child about racism? Or do you have to teach them about fire? The answer is yes. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it did. She's gone. 800-450-7876. Let's go to Jeter, line 1 in South Carolina. Jeter, you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, my question is, and God is so good. He happened to place that caller before me, and my question is in regards to our young people valuing themselves, and also you had mentioned Ferguson. So, like I said, God is good. He's bringing all this together.
All right, well, hold that thought right there, Jeter. Hang on a sec, because we've got to take a break here. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'll let you form your question for Dr. Welsing. Folks, you too can join the conversation with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Just reach out to us at 800-450-78. And thank you for staying with us and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. The number to call to speak to Dr. Welsing, 800-450-7876, and she's known for a best-selling book, The ISIS Papers. I suggest you pick it up if you have not read it yet. Let's go back to South Carolina. Jeter, you ready for your question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, sir, caller, I am. I have two conflicting thoughts in regards to Ferguson. Dr. Welsing, you had mentioned not buying until the trial, because you had mentioned the valuation of our young people. Our boys love to play football. They love to play ball. I was thinking, and may I listen, Carl, to her response?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Carl, can you repeat?
Okay, my question is, should we add not going to the high school football games to the holiday sales, the Halloween, the Thanksgiving, the Christmas, until the trial? Because Michael Brown, as others have mentioned, he enjoyed football. And each of us in our small community could say, okay, we're not going to go to the football game. But then again, I'm thinking our young people may value the huge crowds, and that may say something about their self-esteem. So I'm thinking boycotting the high school game until the trial, and to get the attention of others as far as those injustices on the streets, in the classroom, on the field, as well as, or should we just continue going to football games and cheering for our young people? So I'm conflicted in that.
Well, if I understand you, it's like football games and things like that are important to children. They're performing, etc. And so that's not something that I'd thought about to include. But just in terms of black people spending large quantities of money You see, it's like, how do we show, how do we indicate we are not at all happy about this show of injustice around the killing of this young black men, or all the young black men who might be killed by police officers. And so until this is being addressed in a serious way, we are going to modify what we are doing with our resources. I mean, this is just an idea. I mean, you know, they depend on the holiday season. That's when the largest amount of money is spent by consumers. And so, well, you know, if justice can be delayed, then we can certainly delay our spending, or not engaging in it at all. Put the money in the bank, put the money in a savings account for college education or something. But no, we are not happy about what has happened in this court situation. But that's just one idea that people can think about and talk about.
So we should continue going to the. Okay. Should we not include the attending the football games?
Well, you know, you mentioned what it means to children.
Yes, ma'am.
If you know, if that's important for children, you know, to perform, and I just that's not something that had occurred to me, you know. But when you say not attend the football games, are you talking about spending money or what?
Yes, ma'am. By purchasing the tickets, purchasing the popcorn, the candy that's there. Many football games are broadcast from local radio stations and some television stations. And if we're able to watch it at home or listen to it on a radio, that's one avenue to say, well, up until the trial, I mean, this will be this temporary. There's one avenue to support them by listening and watching on television, listening on radio and watching on television.
Okay, well, it's like, I think that, you know, those are interesting ideas, and I'll give it further thought. And, you know, just talking with people in your community about, you know, how can we show our self-respect, or how can we, it's like the people in the Montgomery bus boycott. Do you see, they said, no, we're not going to ride. We're not going to ride on the bus. Now, for these are different times, different situations, but thinking about what people can do,
yes,
you see, as a part of their understanding of the injustice in a system of racism, white supremacy, how are they going to respond? But I say the first, at the very top of the list, is getting away from this, or we don't understand why certain things are happening, or we don't understand why they do this, or we don't understand, as opposed to, no, we do understand that we are in not a system of democracy, we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and this is why black people experience what they do. And by correctly labeling what the problem is, the one problem that encompasses all of the other problems, that is, to me, that's taking us steps, major steps forward than where we have been in the past.
All right. Thanks, Jeter. Thanks for your call. 800-450-7876. Go to line 2. Gary's in Suitland, Maryland. Gary, you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Yes. Good evening. And what I want to say is I agree with you 100%. We have to gain back our self-respect. We lost it. And one of the problems that I see that we don't do, we are not students of history, because if we study our history, we will see that our ancestors struggled with this, and they came together and they fought it, and they made a lot of headways. I think about, you said you grew up in Chicago. I think about Martha Collins, and he talked about what we do about schools. She started her own school and took the kids that schools say could not be taught, could not learn, was impossible. And she turned those kids into scholars. And yet, she did all this for our community, and her school had to close because we stopped supporting her. So we need to start thinking in terms of supporting ourselves, opening up businesses, and encouraging black people to...
Thank you for staying with us, folks. Just want to remind you, Dr. Umar Johnson is going to be here next week, so keep it locked on 1450 WOL. Let's go back to Ramsey on line 3. Ramsey, you ready now with your question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, Dr. Welsing, I'm sorry about the brain lock. The question I want to ask you is, what part do you think these different secret societies, like the Freemasons, Shriners, and these other Greek fraternities and sororities have on keeping our people down by the divide and conquer thing? Because I'm asking this question because I know most of the people that work for the district is part of the government. When people go to these offices and everything to ask for help, the people look down on them like everybody else look down on poor people. And that's because I want to know our educated people, the ones that belong to these secret societies and everything, what part do they play in keeping us down? Because I really do believe that they have a great deal in keeping us down. And the other thing I want to say about it is the boycotting of the holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, all of them. I agree. That's what needs to be done. That's what we plan to do this year. We're calling for the boycotting of Christmas because December 25th is not Jesus' birthday, and it's a pagan holiday. And so that's why we're asking for the boycotting of Christmas. And I'll look for your comment off there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ramsey.
Carl, can you repeat the first part?
He wanted to know what role does the secret societies play in holding us back?
I just personally don't focus on secret societies as such. In other words, you have a system that is structured consciously, subconsciously by people who classify themselves as white. It's the system of racism, white supremacy that is the so-called secret society because it is denied and that it does exist, but it is the most powerful dynamic that does exist on the planet. So I don't delve into there's some, little group of people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. No, it's the people who classify themselves as white on the planet. It is a reason that they classify themselves in this way, and I say that it is for the practice of white supremacy, and that practice is for white genetic survival on a planet where they're outnumbered by the people who are black, brown, red, and yellow, all of whom are genetically dominant to them in terms of skin coloration. So that is the way that I look at the problem.
So, Doc, does that include the black secret societies as well?
Well, black secret societies, those are black people who are all victims of racism, white supremacy, whether they think of it in those terms or not. I mean, in other words, if you're in a system of racism, white supremacy, and that power equation is white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. Do you see? And so, I mean, we have a black president, and he is demeaned and degraded and mistreated in the same way that other black people are. But he is supposed to be the president, but he is not respected as a white president because we are in a system of racism, white supremacy. And so that's one of the important aspects of his presidency. It's not that he is incapable, it's that he has been told that he is going to be blocked to make him fail. That was openly announced. The goal objective is to make him fail. And the other dimension of that is that as soon as he came into power, there was massive purchasing of guns on the part of people who classify themselves as white. to the point that they called it the Obama effect. See, this is it, you know, when the white police officers talk, they have the weapons, they have the power, they have the guns, and at the same time, they talk about being afraid of black men. Afraid, and I say that idea, that terminology comes from the subconscious fear of white genetic annihilation. I'm afraid that you have the powerful genetic material that can cause my genetic annihilation, which is why the book by Norm Stamper, Breaking Rank, is important, because he talks as a white man, retired police officer. He spoke clearly about white police officers having a fear of black men. The darker they are and the larger they are, the more that fear comes out in violent mistreatment. And so that's what, you know, in other words, non-white people are recognized as non-white people by the people who classify themselves as white. No matter whether the non-white people want to call themselves something else or think that they are in some special group. It's like the president. The president said in the Trayvon Martin case, that could be my son. If I had a son and he was out on the street, he could be subjected to the same thing. It's just like if the president was out on the street trying to get a cab, he would experience the same thing that other black men and women experience trying to get a cab. See, there have even been studies done to indicate if a black person is standing at a crosswalk, that it takes longer for the traffic to stop, for the traffic to respect a black person. 30% longer than it takes for the traffic to stop for a white person. So, you know, there's no mystery. We want to make it a mystery sometimes so we don't have to focus on racism, white supremacy. Or we don't have to focus on how all of us regard us as to income or station are affected by the dynamic of racism, white supremacy.
800-450-7876. Go to line 1. Lisa in Virginia. Lisa, you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Yes, good evening, Carl, and it's a pleasure and an honor to speak to the great doctor. I have a question, and it's really baffling me. I'm in agreement with boycotting the stores and things. However, I believe it should have been done last year when Trayvon was on the scene and whatnot, that protest. Anyway, to my great dismay, this past Monday, I was talking to a young man, and we were in a training together, and one of the trainers had mentioned that he lived in Ferguson before, and the things that was going on was true. And unfortunately, this young man didn't know what he was talking about. And I couldn't go into great detail about what's going on, but, to my astonishment, he did not know. So you're talking about boycotting the stores and things of that nature. How do we get, you suggest we get the word out? Because it's not getting out to the masses. The masses, they get riled up a little bit, but then they fall back to sleep. And so what do you suggest that can be done to get people on board with this? Because, we're almost in October.
All right, let's give a chance to respond. Thanks, Lisa. Good question.
Well, if I heard the question, how to get ideas out to the masses of the people, is by what do we choose to talk about? And granted, there are many, many people. I don't want to talk about racism. I don't know why people want to talk about, I don't believe in race. In other words, talk to those people who are willing to listen and willing to talk. And what is it that we emphasize? And, like repetition, 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 repetition. I've had people say to me, I heard you 20 years ago and I knew you were crazy. Now I understand what you're talking about. You see, 20 years later, now I understand what you are talking about. In other words, the person is saying, now I've begun to understand racism. They didn't understand it before, but it's like, you know, sharing the word, talking, listening to programs like Carl Nelson, encouraging other people to listen, so that, you know, listen to people trying to talk in a serious way about things that they think are serious, impacting the lives of black people. I keep talking about it because I'm afraid not to. I'm so worried about us being on a genocide slide. And make no mistake, people are genocided. They are genocided. Native American people were genocided. People were genocided in Nazi Germany because Adolf Hitler said that he was killing people that he did not consider to be white. And so people are genocided, and the logical end, when a group of people are worried about their genetic survival, is to destroy the people that they are afraid of. You see, and they will do it by posturing and making statements that the people that they are afraid of are the bad people. It's just like the other police officers say, I thought he was a criminal. I thought he had a weapon, so therefore I killed him. But the victim didn't have a weapon, but the fear. So if I'm understanding, you know, what you're saying, we just have to talk. In other words, if somebody said, Dr. Welsing, what is the most important thing that you think that black people should be thinking about and talking about? And I would say it's the local, national, global system of racism, white supremacy. That system dynamic contains all of the things that we complain about, from Ebola to diabetes to hypertension.
And Doc, we got to quit it here, right, because we're just out of time. I want to thank you again for helping us understand what's going on in our world.
Oh, thank you for having me, Carl. You keep up your excellent work.
You keep up your great work. That's Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, folks. You got to roll out of here. You have a great weekend. Stay strong, stay positive.